what's interesting about the role of the government, for example, in creating these policies, for example, on the fuel subsidies, it's, like I mentioned, it's very much a hot potato issue. You know, it's because also historically it has led to transformations of and changes in government. Now, communication is an important point, how to communicate so that everybody is on the same page on the importance and the need to reduce fuel subsidies, exactly for those reasons that you mentioned. And yet, with a democracy, with a democratic government, and it's very sensitive to popular issues and the sort of sensitive about not creating instability, because stability is one of the key drivers of Indonesia's economic success. What is the best way of doing it, especially given that there is will be a difficult relation between the executive and the legislative powers in this country? Because so far it's been a little bit tricky in getting.
I always think that in democracies, the best way to do it is actually to talk to the people. You know, democracies are based on a faith in the capacity of ordinary citizens to make the right decisions, and that means you have to talk to them. And there are a whole variety of channels by which that can be done. Civil society is very important. There should be civil society groups that can understand the importance of this, and grassroots civil society groups that can get the message out. The media is extraordinarily important for this. The media can play an important role in trying to explain what this is all about. That, in fact, this is not just the usual IMF saying you have to tighten your belt, you have to, this is really a question about where the money gets spent, who benefits. Is this something that will lead to long-term economic growth? Are there ways of helping the poor that are more sustainable? And these are fundamental issues. It's not saying we believe that in market fundamentalism, or we believe that markets on their own are going to work. No, it's really saying this is not the best way to spend the money, no matter what your objectives are, unless your objective is to help the owners of the Mercedes.
This fear of instability, or you know, what it's social turbulences, how serious is it, do you see, in Indonesia now? I mean, you know Indonesia and Indonesia's history quite well. Are we still vulnerable to those kinds of shocks, or do you think, yes, it's time, and then we can actually do it, and do it quite well, quite successfully, without too much of a shock to this system, of the social system, particularly of Indonesia? Are we
well, I think
resilient?
Whatever course a country takes, there are risks. There are risks that I judge are more significant if you don't grow and if you don't spend money to really reduce the inequality. So the huge inequality in Indonesia, the poor performance in education that will impair the opportunity of young people. These are things which over the long run will risk there being stability. So, as always, you always have, you know, short run versus long run.
Sometimes short is more painful.
Short run may be more painful, but I think Indonesia is in a good position, precisely because you've had 10 years or so of very good growth, but based on the extractive industry. And that's not a sustainable model. Particularly with the slowdown in China, in the global economy, and the slowdown in China. So anybody looking at, okay, how do I maximize the stability over the next 10 years? I say bite the bullet now, because the risk now is a good time to do it. And
the benefits outweigh the risk.
The benefits outweigh the risk, and the risk going forward of not doing it.
But are you optimistic about Indonesia? I mean, once you called, we are part of the East Asian miracle. Do we still, I mean, do we have that miraculous capacity in
I think I'm actually think of East Asia and Indonesia in particular as more miraculous today than it was when I did that study on the East Asia miracle back in the early 90s.
So you're optimistic.
So I am optimistic. I mean, you would had a long run of economic growth. You then had, shall we say, a little turbulence in the late 90s. And you got over it.
Yes.
And you returned to, again, strong economic growth. Facing difficulties and surviving and then growing should give you some confidence.
Yes, well, actually we are foreseeing more difficulties ahead with this new government because of the difficulties in the relationship perhaps between, like I said, the president and the parliament, which is, maybe something that you're quite familiar with the Obama administration,
exactly.
always, getting beaten down by Congress, and especially the Republicans. But compared to other countries, I mean, Indonesia is now part of the G20, and it's, we're touted to become one of the number 10, 10 biggest economy in the world, and with big consumer market in the future. In terms of comparative advantage, particularly with the neighbors, what should we really invest on to make sure that our economy can only grow?
Well, let me, you're talking about the various countries and the different advantages and disadvantages. One of the really big strengths of Indonesia is its large population, 250 million, and its democracy, which has proved itself again. All democracies have difficulties, but as the United States demonstrates, but you have now shown yourself to be a stable democracy and a large democracy. So what does that suggest? One of the things it means is that you have a huge domestic market, and with a growing middle class. That's going to be a basis of strong economic growth, even if the external environment slows down. Export-led growth was a good way to start. It's a good way to go from very low levels to where you are today. But in the end, most large economies rely to a large extent on themselves. None of us are autarkic, none of us can be self-reliant, but when you have 250 million customers, that's a big customer base.
Potential consumers.
Potential consumers. And if you create jobs, that's a big market. And so there are real synergies. So yes, continue to look at the export opportunities, grab them where you can, but not be just fixated on those export opportunities, and realize that the economies of the future, including the United States, are increasingly service sector economies, and service sectors are, to a very large extent, domestically oriented.